Welcome and settle in. Tonight, we are not chasing legends or following mercenaries through neon-lit streets. Tonight, we are going to sleep inside history itself. Not the kind written by victors or preserved in clean timelines, but the kind that accumulates quietly, decision by decision, compromise by compromise, until the world wakes up somewhere it no longer recognizes. The world of Cyberpunk 2077 did not arrive suddenly. It was not born in fire or declared into existence by a single catastrophe. It emerged slowly, almost politely, as systems designed to protect people began to serve something else entirely. Governments did not vanish overnight. They eroded. Institutions did not fall in dramatic fashion. They hollowed out. And while most people were busy surviving 1 year at a time, the future was being quietly rewritten. This story is about the future before it had a name. Before Night City, before Chrome and contracts, before mercenaries and megacorporations became everyday facts of life. This is the foundation. The long, uneasy prelude to a world where power is owned, safety is subscribed to, and humanity is measured by utility. So take a breath. Let the noise of the day fade away, and let's begin at the moment when the old world started to come apart. Long before Night City's skyline pierced the smog-choked sky, before Chrome replaced flesh and corporations eclipsed nations, the world of Cyberpunk was already unraveling. The year 2077 is not the beginning of this story. It is merely the moment when all the fractures, compromises, and quiet catastrophes of the previous century finally become impossible to ignore. To understand the cyberpunk world, we must begin, not with neon lights or mercenaries, but with the slow, methodical collapse of trust in institutions that were once believed to be permanent. In the latter half of the 20th century, a global order outwardly appeared stable. Nation-states still held borders, currencies still carried faith, and governments still spoke the language of representation and accountability. Yet beneath this surface, pressures were mounting. Rapid globalization had interconnected markets faster than laws could regulate them. Corporations, once bound by national oversight, began operating across borders with unprecedented freedom. Environmental exploitation accelerated as governments prioritized economic growth over sustainability, often under intense corporate lobbying. The result was a world growing richer on paper and poorer everywhere else in the United States. These tensions manifested as a creeping erosion of federal authority. Decades of proxy wars, intelligence operations, and corporate influence had blurred the line between public governance and private interest. Intelligence agencies accumulated power far beyond their original mandates, justifying extraordinary measures in the name of national security. Surveillance became normalized. Civil liberties became conditional. What was once exceptional gradually became routine. At the same time, economic disparity widened at an alarming pace. Automation and early expert systems displaced millions of workers, particularly in manufacturing and logistics. While productivity soared, wages stagnated. Entire communities found themselves obsolete almost overnight, their labor replaced by machines owned by distant shareholders. Government retraining programs proved inadequate, underfunded, or quietly abandoned. For many, the social contract no longer felt reciprocal. Environmental damage compounded these issues. Industrial pollution intensified throughout the 1980s and 1990s as regulations were weakened or selectively enforced. Acid rain devastated farmland. Climate instability disrupted traditional growing seasons. Fisheries collapsed after repeated chemical spills and overexploitation. These were not sudden disasters, but cumulative ones, unfolding slowly enough that no single event could be blamed, yet rapidly enough that recovery became impossible. As public infrastructure faltered, corporations stepped in to fill the gaps. Private security firms replaced underfunded police departments in wealthy districts. Corporate-run utilities ensured consistent power and water for those who could afford premium contracts, while public systems decayed. Healthcare followed a similar path. Insurance-based access created tiers of survival, where the quality and speed of medical treatment depended less on need and more on subscription status. This shift did not happen overnight, but each incremental privatization made reversal less likely. Technology advanced unevenly through this period. Computing power increased exponentially, but access remained stratified. Early neural interface research promised revolutionary applications in medicine, communication, and human-machine interaction. Yet these technologies were expensive, experimental, and often dangerous. Corporate research divisions pushed aggressively forward, motivated by profit and competitive advantage rather than ethical restraint. Regulatory bodies, already weakened, struggled to keep pace with innovations they barely understood. The digital frontier, known as the net, emerged during this era as both a marvel and a warning. Initially conceived as a decentralized information space, it quickly became a battleground for corporate espionage, financial manipulation, and state-sponsored intrusion. Firewalls and countermeasures escalated alongside increasingly sophisticated intrusion software. Information became both the most valuable commodity and the most dangerous weapon. Those who could navigate the net gained influence disproportionate to their physical presence. Culturally, societies began to fragment. Shared narratives weakened as media conglomerates tailored content to specific demographics, reinforcing ideological silos. Traditional journalism struggled to survive in a landscape dominated by corporate-owned networks with vested interests. Truth became negotiable, shaped by sponsorships, algorithms, and audience retention metrics. Public discourse grew louder, faster, and shallower, leaving little room for consensus. Internationally, power blocks shifted. Economic alliances replaced ideological ones. Nations that failed to adapt to the new corporate-driven order found themselves marginalized or destabilized. In regions rich with resources but poor in governance, corporations effectively became sovereign powers, negotiating directly with local militias or private armies. The distinction between war and business eroded until conflict itself became a market dot by the early 1990s. These trends converged into systemic crisis. Governments increasingly relied on corporations for funding, logistics, and security, granting them unprecedented concessions in return. Corporate legal teams grew more powerful than regulatory agencies. Political careers became dependent on sponsorship and influence rather than public support. Democracy, where it still existed, functioned more as a performance than a mechanism for change. For ordinary people, daily life became defined by uncertainty. Employment was unstable. Housing was precarious. Healthcare was conditional. Education became a privilege rather than a guarantee. In response, informal economies flourished. Black markets, barter systems, and local protection arrangements filled the void left by failing institutions. Communities adapted, not by fixing the system, but by working around it. This period also marked the psychological normalization of augmentation. Early prosthetics and cybernetic enhancements were initially medical necessities, restoring mobility or sensory function. Over time, enhancements expanded beyond therapy into optimization. Stronger limbs, faster reflexes, enhanced perception. What began as optional became competitive. In certain industries, augmentation was no longer an advantage, but an expectation. Those who refused fell behind. The human cost of this transformation was profound. Identity became increasingly tied to utility. People were valued for what they could produce, hack, or defend. Emotional resilience eroded under constant economic pressure and information overload. Violence, once shocking, became ambient. Security checkpoints, Armed guards and surveillance drones blended into the background of everyday life. Crucially, none of this felt like an apocalypse. There were no single days when the world ended. Instead, the collapse was bureaucratic, contractual, and incremental. Each policy exception, each emergency measure, each privatized service seemed reasonable in isolation. Only in retrospect does the pattern become clear by the time the United States and much of the world entered the final decade of the 20th century. The foundations of the cyberpunk era were already firmly in place. Governments were hollowed out. Corporations were entrenched. Technology had outpaced ethics. The environment was wounded. Society was fragmented. Night City would one day rise from these conditions, not as an anomaly, but as their purest expression. A city designed to function within the logic of corporate dominance rather than resist it. But before that city could exist, the old world had to fail completely, and it was already well on its way. The collapse of the old United States did not begin with riots in the streets or flags burning on government buildings. It began behind closed doors, in offices without windows, in briefing rooms where classified language softened the reality of what was being done. By the early 1990s, the American federal system still existed on paper, but the machinery that sustained it was already operating on borrowed time. Decades of foreign intervention, covert operations, and economic manipulation had reshaped the priorities of the federal government. Intelligence agencies no longer merely advised elected officials. They guided them. In many cases, they acted without them. What justified this shift was a permanent state of emergency. Drug trafficking, terrorism, economic warfare. Every crisis expanded authority, and every expansion became permanent. Out of this environment emerged what history would later call the Gang of Four. This was not a formal organization, nor was it ever acknowledged publicly. It was a convergence of leadership from four powerful federal institutions: intelligence, law enforcement, counterintelligence, and narcotics enforcement, operating in concert with sympathetic figures inside the executive branch. Their justification was simple. The United States, they believed, could no longer survive under its existing democratic framework. Too slow, too divided, too vulnerable to foreign influence and internal dissent. What followed was a quiet coup, rather than tanks on the lawn or soldiers in the streets. The takeover unfolded through policy, emergency directives, and reinterpreted legal authority. Surveillance powers expanded dramatically. Financial oversight was centralized under federal control, aligned with corporate interests. Dissidents were not arrested en masse, but reclassified. Activists, labor organizers, and political opponents were increasingly labeled as threats to national stability. Once framed that way, extraordinary measures became easy to justify. At the same time, the United States intensified its involvement in Central and South America. Officially, these operations targeted drug cartels and insurgent groups. Unofficially, they were about markets. Many South and Central American nations had begun asserting economic independence, nationalizing resources, and resisting corporate monopolies. This posed a direct threat to American megacorporations that depended on cheap labor, controlled supply chains, and political compliance. Federal agencies coordinated paramilitary actions under the banner of counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism. Local governments were destabilized through proxy forces. Infrastructure was sabotaged. Regimes that leaned towards socialism or economic autonomy found themselves under relentless pressure. For American corporations, this was protection of interests. For local populations, it was occupation. These conflicts accelerated the privatization of warfare. Traditional military units proved ill-suited for jungle warfare and prolonged counterinsurgency campaigns. In response, the United States invested heavily in mechanized infantry, and early cybernetic enhancement programs. Soldiers were augmented for endurance, reaction speed, and combat efficiency. Experimental technologies were deployed far from public scrutiny. Casualties were classified. Failures were buried. While these wars dragged on abroad, the domestic situation deteriorated rapidly. In 1994, the illusion finally shattered. Years of financial manipulation, currency interference, and market distortion collapsed under their own weight. When international economic blocs exposed the extent of American stock fraud and artificial market inflation, global confidence evaporated almost overnight. Trade embargoes followed. Foreign investment withdrew. The dollar collapsed. The crash of 1994 was not a recession. It was systemic failure. Banks closed. Savings vanished. Entire pension systems dissolved. Millions were rendered homeless within months. With the World Bank and stock exchanges effectively defunct, the federal government lost its ability to borrow or stabilize the economy. Emergency printing of currency only accelerated inflation. Food shortages spread as logistics networks failed. What remained of the federal budget was redirected almost entirely toward internal security. Governments began acting independently out of necessity. Federal aid was non-existent. National Guard units answered to local authorities rather than Washington. As civil unrest grew, martial law was declared in major cities. Curfews were enforced by a patchwork of federal agents, privatized security forces, and hastily deputized personnel. In some cases, entire neighborhoods were sealed off and abandoned. Environmental collapse compounded the crisis. Years of neglect and industrial abuse culminated in catastrophic agricultural failure. Dust bowls returned to the Midwest. Acid rain rendered large tracts of farmland unusable. Toxic spills wiped out fisheries and poisoned water supplies. Climate instability turned once fertile regions into economic dead zones. Food production plummeted just as demand spiked. The Middle East did not escape this era unscathed. A limited nuclear exchange between regional powers devastated vast areas, contaminating land across multiple countries and reducing global oil output by nearly half. Energy prices skyrocketed. Remaining fuel reserves were hoarded for military and industrial use. Civilian access became increasingly restricted, accelerating the search for alternative energy sources. Back in the United States, political legitimacy collapsed entirely after the assassination of the sitting president in the mid-1990s. The circumstances surrounding the killing were never fully clarified, but the result was unmistakable. Power transferred to figures deeply aligned with the security apparatus that had already hollowed out federal governance. What little public trust remained evaporated. Federal forces were ordered to suppress internal dissent with overwhelming force. In some cities, this resulted in mass civilian casualties. Artillery strikes, aerial surveillance, and urban pacification tactics previously reserved for foreign battlefields were deployed domestically. These actions shocked the public, but fear proved more powerful than outrage. States began to secede in practice, if not immediately in name. Tax payments to Washington ceased. Federal authority was openly defied. When attempts were made to reassert control, the regular military refused. Years of being used as an enforcement arm for corrupt leadership had eroded loyalty. Orders were ignored. Units stood down. By the early 2000s, the United States no longer functioned as a unified nation. What replaced it was a fractured landscape of free states, corporate territories, and abandoned regions. Mega-corporations, flush with capital and armed with private security forces, stepped into the vacuum. They provided jobs, housing, and protection, but only on contractual terms. Citizenship was replaced with employment status. Rights were replaced with service agreements. In this new reality, corporations were not simply businesses. They were governments in all but name. They controlled infrastructure, enforced law, and waged war. Their loyalty was not to flags or constitutions, but to shareholders and balance sheets. For the average person, survival meant adaptation. Clan-like communities formed among the displaced. Nomadic groups roamed the highways, salvaging and trading. Cities decayed or transformed depending on corporate interest. Some places were written off entirely. The old United States never formally ended. It simply stopped mattering, and from its remains, a new world took shape. A world where power belonged to those who could afford it, where violence was outsourced, and where the future was, negotiated in contracts rather than constitutions, was the world that made Night City possible. And it was only the beginning. When the United States began to fracture and the old guarantees of stability evaporated, most people responded by retreating inward. They focused on survival, on protecting what little they had left. Corporations fortified themselves. Governments tried to hold together institutions that no longer commanded loyalty. But a small number of individuals looked at the collapse and saw not only danger, but opportunity. Richard Knight was one of them. Knight was not a warlord, nor was he a politician. He was an architect, a developer, and above all, an idealist shaped by the logic of corporate pragmatism. He believed that the failure of American cities was not inevitable, but structural. In his view, urban centers had collapsed because they were designed for a social contract that no longer existed. Cities were still built on assumptions of public trust, shared responsibility, and long-term civic investment. Those assumptions, Knight believed, were obsolete. What the world needed, in his mind, was a city designed from the ground up for the new reality. A city that acknowledged corporate dominance rather than resisting it. A city where security, infrastructure, and growth were not dependent on failing governments, but guaranteed through private control. Not chaos contained by force, but order engineered by design. Knight envisioned a self-sustaining metropolis, one that would be economically independent, physically defensible, and culturally diverse. He believed that if people could be given stability, safety, and opportunity within a controlled environment, the worst excesses of the collapsing world could be held at bay. Crime would be minimized through intelligent zoning and security integration. Poverty would be reduced through constant construction and employment. Culture would be preserved by dividing the city into distinct districts, each with its own architectural identity. This was not a democratic vision. But Knight never pretended it was to make his vision real. Knight needed three things: land, money, and partners who were powerful enough to operate beyond the reach of a collapsing federal system. The land came first. Decades of foreign intervention, covert operations, and economic manipulation had reshaped the priorities of the federal government. Intelligence agencies no longer merely advised elected officials. They guided them. In many cases, they acted without them. What justified this shift was a permanent state of emergency. Drug trafficking, terrorism, economic warfare. Every crisis expanded authority, and every expansion became permanent. Out of this environment emerged what history would later call Gang of Four. This was not a formal organization, nor was it ever acknowledged publicly. It was a convergence of leadership from four powerful federal institutions: intelligence, law enforcement, counterintelligence, and narcotics enforcement, operating in concert with sympathetic figures inside the executive branch. Their justification was simple. The United States, they believed, could no longer survive under its existing democratic framework. Too slow, too divided, too vulnerable to foreign influence and internal dissent. What followed was a quiet coup rather than tanks on the lawn or soldiers in the streets. The takeover unfolded through policy, emergency directives, and reinterpreted legal authority. Surveillance powers expanded dramatically. Financial oversight was centralized under federal control, aligned with corporate interests. Dissidents were not arrested en masse, but reclassified. Activists, labor organizers, and political opponents were increasingly labeled as threats to national stability. Once framed that way, extraordinary measures became easy to justify. At the same time, the United States intensified its involvement in Central and South America. Officially, these operations targeted drug cartels and insurgent groups. Unofficially, they were about markets. Many South and Central American nations had begun asserting economic independence, nationalizing resources, and resisting corporate monopolies. This posed a direct threat to American megacorporations that depended on cheap labor, controlled supply chains, and political compliance. Federal agencies coordinated paramilitary actions under the banner of counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism. Local governments were destabilized through proxy forces. Infrastructure was sabotaged. Regimes that leaned towards socialism or economic autonomy found themselves under relentless pressure. For American corporations, this was protection of interests. For local populations, it was occupation. These conflicts accelerated the privatization of warfare. Traditional military units proved ill-suited for jungle warfare and prolonged counterinsurgency campaigns. In response, the United States invested heavily in mechanized infantry and early cybernetic enhancement programs. Soldiers were augmented for endurance, reaction speed, and combat efficiency. Experimental technologies were deployed far from public scrutiny. Casualties were classified. Failures were buried. While these wars dragged on abroad, the domestic situation deteriorated rapidly. In 1994, the illusion finally shattered. Years of financial manipulation, currency interference, and market distortion collapsed under their own weight. When international economic blocs exposed the extent of American stock fraud and artificial market inflation, global confidence evaporated almost overnight. Trade embargoes followed. Foreign investment withdrew. The dollar collapsed. The crash of 1994 was not a recession. It was systemic failure. Banks closed. Savings vanished. Entire pension systems dissolved. Millions were rendered homeless within months. With the World Bank and stock exchanges effectively defunct, the federal government lost its ability to borrow or stabilize the economy. Emergency printing of currency only accelerated inflation. Food shortages spread as logistics networks failed. What remained of the federal budget was redirected almost entirely toward internal security. State governments began acting independently out of necessity. Federal aid was non-existent. National Guard units answered to local authorities rather than Washington. As civil unrest grew, martial law was declared in major cities. Curfews were enforced by a patchwork of federal agents, privatized security forces, and hastily deputized personnel. In some cases, entire neighborhoods were sealed off and abandoned. Environmental collapse compounded the crisis. Years of neglect and industrial abuse culminated in catastrophic agricultural failure. Dust bowls returned to the Midwest. Acid rain rendered large tracts of farmland unusable. Toxic spills wiped out fisheries and poisoned water supplies. Climate instability turned once fertile regions into economic dead zones. Food production plummeted just as demand spiked. The Middle East did not escape this era unscathed. A limited nuclear exchange between regional powers devastated vast areas, contaminating land across multiple countries and reducing global oil output by nearly half. Energy prices skyrocketed. Remaining fuel reserves were hoarded for military and industrial use. Civilian access became increasingly restricted, accelerating the search for alternative energy sources. Back in the United States, political legitimacy collapsed entirely after the assassination of the sitting president in the mid-1990s. The circumstances surrounding the killing were never fully clarified, but the result was unmistakable. Power transferred to figures deeply aligned with the security apparatus that had already hollowed out federal governance. What little public trust remained evaporated. Federal forces were ordered to suppress internal dissent with overwhelming force. In some cities, this resulted in mass civilian casualties. Artillery strikes, aerial surveillance, and urban pacification tactics previously reserved for foreign battlefields were deployed domestically. These actions shocked the public, but fear proved more powerful than outrage. States began to secede in practice, if not immediately in name. Tax payments to Washington ceased. Federal authority was openly defied. When attempts were made to reassert control, the regular military refused. Years of being used as an enforcement arm for corrupt leadership had eroded loyalty. Orders were ignored. Units stood down. By the early 2000s, the United States no longer functioned as a unified nation. What replaced it was a fractured landscape of free states, corporate territories, and abandoned regions. Megacorporations, flush with capital and armed with private security forces, stepped into the vacuum. They provided jobs, housing, and protection, but only on contractual terms. Citizenship was replaced with employment status. Rights were replaced with service agreements. In this new reality, corporations were not simply businesses. They were governments in all but name. They controlled infrastructure, enforced law, and waged war. Their loyalty was not to flags or constitutions, but to shareholders and balance sheets. For the average person, survival meant adaptation. Clan-like communities formed among the displaced. Nomadic groups roamed the highways, salvaging and trading. Cities decayed or transformed depending on corporate interest. Some places were written off entirely. The old United States never formally ended. It simply stopped mattering. And from its remains, a new world took shape. A world where power belonged to those who could afford it, where violence was outsourced, and where the future was negotiated in contracts rather than constitutions. This was the world that made Night City possible, and it was only the beginning when the United States began to fracture and the old guarantees of stability evaporated. Most people responded by retreating inward. They focused on survival, on protecting what little they had left. Corporations fortified themselves. Governments tried to hold together institutions that no longer commanded loyalty. But a small number of individuals looked at the collapse and saw not only danger, but opportunity. Richard Knight was one of them. Knight was not a warlord, nor was he a politician. He was an architect, a developer, and above all, an idealist shaped by the logic of corporate pragmatism. He believed that the failure of American cities was not inevitable, but structural. In his view, urban centers had collapsed because they were designed for a social contract that no longer existed. Cities were still built on assumptions of public trust, shared responsibility, and long-term civic investment. Those assumptions, Knight believed, were obsolete. What the world needed, in his mind, was a city designed from the ground up for the new reality. A city that acknowledged corporate dominance rather than resisting it. A city where security, infrastructure, and growth were not dependent on failing governments, but guaranteed through private control. Not chaos contained by force, but order engineered by design. Knight envisioned a self-sustaining metropolis, one that would be economically independent, physically defensible, and culturally diverse. He believed that if people could be given stability, safety, and opportunity within a controlled environment, the worst excesses of the collapsing world could be held at bay. Crime would be minimized through intelligent zoning and security integration. Poverty would be reduced through constant construction and employment. Culture would be preserved by dividing the city into distinct districts, each with its own architectural identity, This was not a democratic vision. But Knight never pretended it was to make his vision real. Knight needed three things: land, money, and partners who were powerful enough to operate beyond the reach of a collapsing federal system. The land came first. Along the central coast of California lay a small, unremarkable settlement that had quietly emptied out during the early years of national decline. Environmental contamination, economic isolation, and population flight had turned the area into little more than a footnote in regional news. For Knight, it was ideal. The location offered coastal access, proximity to major transport routes, and enough distance from established urban centers to avoid immediate political interference through a series of leveraged acquisitions, shell companies, and strategic partnerships. Knight secured control over vast stretches of coastal land at a fraction of its former value. Much of it was officially designated as industrial wasteland. That designation worked in his favor. Zoning restrictions were minimal. Environmental oversight was effectively non-existent. What others saw as poisoned ground, Knight saw as a blank slate. The money came next. In the wake of the economic collapse, mega corporations were flush with capital, but starved for stability. They needed secure hubs where operations could continue uninterrupted. Places insulated from labor unrest, state interference, and unpredictable regulation. Knight's proposal arrived at exactly the right moment. A consortium of powerful corporations agreed to back the project. Their motivations were not altruistic. Each saw the city as an investment, a controlled environment where infrastructure could be optimized and profits maximized. Knight offered the blueprint. They supplied the funding. Together, they formed what would become known as the Coronado Partnership. These corporations did not merely invest. They embedded themselves into the city's foundation. Construction contracts, security planning, energy production, and logistics were all structured to favor corporate governance from the outset. There would be no transition period. The city would be corporate by design. Construction began in the mid-1990s. The physical transformation of the coastline was immense. Hills were flattened and used as landfill. Harbors were dredged and reshaped to accommodate massive cargo vessels. Artificial extensions pushed the shoreline outward, creating space for ports, industrial zones, and future expansion. What had once been a modest bay became a sprawling engineered landscape. Knight took a personal interest in the city's layout. He rejected uniformity. Instead, he insisted on architectural diversity. Districts inspired by major global cities were planned side by side. Residential zones were integrated with commercial spaces to encourage constant activity. Walkability was prioritized, not for comfort, but for surveillance and control. A city in motion was a city easier to monitor. At the center of it all rose the corporate core. Towering structures of glass and steel designed to project permanence and power. These were not merely office buildings. They were symbols. In a world where governments failed, these towers were meant to communicate continuity. But even as the city rose, cracks appeared. Large-scale construction on the West Coast had long been dominated by organized crime. Control over unions, shipping, and heavy equipment meant that no project of this size could proceed without criminal involvement. Knight understood this risk. He believed he could manage it. For a time, he succeeded. By relying on proprietary construction methods and bypassing traditional labor structures. Knight minimized mob influence within the city's core districts. But exclusion bred resentment. Sabotage followed. Threats escalated. What began as intimidation slowly turned into open conflict. Turned to his corporate partners for protection. They responded. Decisively, private security forces neutralized criminal interference with ruthless efficiency. Construction continued. Officially, the city remained crime-free. Unofficially, Violence was simply pushed out of sight. Despite mounting pressure, Knight remained committed to his vision. He believed that once the city was complete, its structure would stabilize itself. That order would replace chaos. That the worst forces circling the project would lose interest once profits stabilized. He never lived to see whether he was right. In 1998, Richard Knight was assassinated in his penthouse apartment, high above the city he had created. The circumstances of his death were never conclusively resolved. No suspects were convicted. Theories ranged from organized crime retaliation to internal corporate maneuvering. What mattered was the result. The city lost its founder. Public reaction was immediate. Richard Knight had become a symbol, a rare figure who spoke openly about rebuilding rather than surviving. In the aftermath of his death, the city council formally renamed the metropolis in his honor. Night City was born, but without Knight, the balance he had tried to maintain collapsed quickly. Corporate partners tightened their grip. Criminal organizations regrouped. Governance became fragmented. The city endured, but it no longer followed a single vision. Richard Knight had dreamed of a city that could stand apart from the chaos of the world. Instead, he created a city that would absorb that chaos, amplify it, and eventually redefine it. The experiment had begun, and Night City would never be the same. The years immediately following Richard Knight's assassination were defined by absence. Not only the absence of the man himself, but the absence of a unifying vision strong enough to restrain the forces he had kept in uneasy balance. Night City survived his death, but it did not remain the city he had imagined. Without its architect at the center, the structure he built began to bend under the weight of competing interests. In the aftermath, governance of Night City fell to a fractured city council whose authority existed largely at the pleasure of corporate backers. While the city possessed nominal autonomy, real power flowed through contracts, private security forces, and corporate influence. Each major stakeholder sought to secure its own assets rather than preserve the city as a whole. Stability was no longer a shared goal. It was a commodity. Organized crime was the first to exploit this shift. During construction, criminal syndicates had been pushed to the margins, kept at bay by corporate muscle and Richard Knight's personal intervention. After his death, those barriers weakened. Crime families that had long dominated West Coast construction, shipping, and logistics began moving back into the city. They did not arrive as invaders, but as service providers. Where corporations focused on high-level operations, the mob filled the gaps below. Illegal gambling, drug distribution, and human trafficking networks established themselves with alarming speed. Entire neighborhoods fell under de facto criminal administration. Protection rackets replaced public services. Disputes were settled through violence rather than courts. For residents of these districts, the choice was simple: submit, leave, or disappear. The Night City Police Department was ill-equipped to respond. Originally envisioned as a modern, well-funded force integrated into the city's design, the NCPD quickly found itself outmatched. Corruption spread as officers accepted bribes to supplement stagnant wages. Others simply walked away. Equipment shortages, jurisdictional confusion, and political interference rendered coordinated enforcement impossible. The police did not collapse overnight, but they lost credibility street by street. As crime intensified, certain districts became effectively ungovernable. These areas were sealed off, abandoned by both corporations and city authorities, and quietly written out of official maps. This was the beginning of what would become known as the combat zone. The combat zone was not a single location, but a growing scar. Within its boundaries, gangs operated openly, enforcing their own rules. Infrastructure decayed rapidly. Power grids failed. Water systems collapsed. Makeshift markets emerged alongside armed checkpoints. Violence became constant and unpredictable. For many, the combat zone represented the purest expression of Night City's underlying logic, survival without illusion. Meanwhile, corporate districts hardened. Private security forces expanded their presence, erecting barriers and checkpoints that divided the city into zones of privilege and abandonment. Corporate plazas were maintained with meticulous care, their streets clean and illuminated, their residents insulated from the chaos beyond. This contrast was not accidental. It was a demonstration that the message was clear. Order existed, but only where it was profitable. As organized crime consolidated power, rival syndicates inevitably clashed. Competition over territory, supply routes, and revenue streams escalated into open warfare. Car bombings, targeted assassinations, and mass shootings became routine. Civilian casualties mounted, but few investigations followed. The city council issued statements. Corporations reinforced their borders. By the mid-2000s, Night City had become a battleground. The mob's influence extended into city administration itself. Officials were bribed or threatened into compliance. Public contracts were sold to criminal fronts. Regulatory oversight ceased to function. Even corporations that had once supported Richard Knight's vision found themselves sidelined as illicit profits eclipsed long-term investment. Yet organized crime was never designed to govern an entire metropolis. Its power depended on fear, not infrastructure, on control, not maintenance. As violence spiraled, economic activity outside corporate enclaves collapsed. Supply chains were disrupted. Insurance costs skyrocketed. The city became bad for business. That was when the corporations intervened. What followed became known as the Mob War. Corporate-backed paramilitary units, many trained by the same private forces used overseas, entered the city with overwhelming firepower. Armored vehicles rolled through gang-held districts. Precision strikes eliminated syndicate leadership. Entire blocks were cleared in coordinated assaults. This was not law enforcement. It was urban warfare. The conflict was brief and brutal. Organized crime networks were dismantled with ruthless efficiency. Survivors were forced underground or into corporate servitude. Any remaining groups were permitted to operate only under strict corporate oversight. Their activities tolerated so long as they did not threaten profitability. In the war's aftermath, the city was reshaped once again. Corporations moved swiftly to formalize control. A compliant mayor was installed. Corporate security forces were granted expanded policing authority. Public housing was demolished or repurposed, displacing thousands. Affordable districts vanished almost overnight, replaced by fortified zones for employees and assets deemed valuable. For many residents, life improved marginally. Random violence decreased. Infrastructure returned in select areas. For others, conditions worsened. Homelessness surged. Displacement became the norm. Entire communities were erased in the name of stability. Night City had survived its adolescence, but it emerged changed. The city no longer pretended to belong to its people. It belonged to those who could enforce their will. The streets learned this lesson quickly. Mercenaries, fixers, and independent operators began to fill the spaces left by destroyed syndicates. Violence became contractual. Loyalty became temporary. Foundation of the modern Night City underworld was laid, and the city was ready for its next transformation. After the mob war burned itself out and the last major crime syndicates were either destroyed or absorbed, Night City entered a strange and uneasy calm. The explosions stopped. The open street battles faded. For the first time in years, the city could be described as stable. But stability in Night City never meant peace. It meant control. Corporations moved quickly to consolidate the gains made during the purge. With organized crime reduced to manageable fragments, the megacorps reasserted their dominance over the city's infrastructure. Security checkpoints became permanent. Surveillance systems expanded into every major district. Corporate police forces were granted authority equal to, and often exceeding, that of public law enforcement. The Night City Police Department still existed, but it was no longer the primary instrument of order. Instead, it functioned as a supplementary force, tasked with managing low-level crime and maintaining the appearance of civic continuity. Real power lay with corporate security divisions, whose jurisdiction conveniently aligned with areas of economic importance. This restructuring fundamentally changed how violence operated within the city. Unregulated, chaos was bad for business. But controlled violence could be profitable. Corporations had little interest in eliminating crime entirely. Illicit economies provided leverage, disposable labor, and plausible deniability. What they wanted was predictability, crime that followed rules, violence that stayed within acceptable thresholds. To achieve this, they allowed a new intermediary class to emerge. FIXERS became the tissue of Night City's underworld. They were brokers, negotiators, and talent scouts. Corporations used them to outsource tasks that required discretion. Gangs relied on them to access resources and information. Independent operators depended on them for work. Fixers thrived because they understood the boundaries no one was supposed to cross. Around fixers, a new type of labor market formed. Mercenaries, often referred to as edge runners. These individuals occupied the space between corporate assets and expendable deniability. They were hired to retrieve data, eliminate targets, sabotage competitors, or protect valuable interests. Contracts were short-term. Loyalty was transactional. Survival depended on reputation. For many, becoming an edge runner was not a choice. It was the only viable path left. Traditional employment had vanished for large segments of the population. Automation, corporate downsizing, and privatization hollowed out the middle class. Those without corporate contracts found themselves excluded from housing, healthcare, and legal protection. Running jobs for fixers offered a way to stay afloat. Sometimes, it offered a way up. This economy reshaped the city's social fabric. Neighborhoods adapted to the constant flow of mercenaries and freelancers. Clinics specializing in unregistered cyberware flourished. Weapon vendors operated openly in districts where enforcement was selective. Bars and clubs doubled as information hubs. Trust became a currency more valuable than money. Cyberware was central to this transformation. Augmentation was no longer experimental or rare. It was expected. Reflex boosters, reinforced skeletons, neural interfaces, optical enhancements. Each upgrade increased survivability and market value. But cyberware came at a cost. Financial, psychological, and physiological. The line between human and machine blurred, and with it, the sense of personal identity. Those who pushed augmentation too far risked losing emotional regulation. Empathy diminished. Impulse control degraded. Violent psychotic episodes became more common, particularly among heavily modified individuals. This phenomenon came to be known as cyberpsychosis. To address this threat, specialized response units were created. Max TAC. Originally formed as a last resort countermeasure. MaxTac units were deployed to neutralize cyberpsychotic incidents with overwhelming force. Their presence reinforced the city's underlying reality. Enhancement was encouraged, even required. Losing control was punished with lethal efficiency. Meanwhile, gangs adapted to the new order. Without the centralized leadership of old crime syndicates, gangs became more localized and identity-driven. Territory still mattered, but ideology and image grew equally important. Some aligned themselves with corporate interests. Others rejected corporate control entirely, carving out hostile enclaves within the city's neglected zones. Corporate districts prospered, clean streets, reliable power, premium healthcare. Residents lived under constant surveillance, but they were safe. Outside those zones, conditions varied dramatically. Some neighborhoods achieved fragile stability through informal governance. Others slid back into lawlessness, tolerated as long as they remained contained. Night City had become a machine. The city that consumed ambition and produced legends. Where failure was fatal and success temporary. Where every interaction carried risk and every opportunity came with strings attached. For those who learned how to navigate its systems, Night City offered a chance at power. For everyone else, it offered survival. The age of the edgerunner had begun, and the city was watching by the time the world entered the 2020s. The fragile balance that had allowed megacorporations to coexist was already eroding. Competition had always been ruthless, but it had been contained by mutual interest. That restraint did not last. What followed was not a misunderstanding or a sudden escalation. It was the inevitable result of decades of corporate militarization, unchecked ambition, and a global system that rewarded dominance above all else. This was the Fourth Corporate War. Unlike traditional wars, there were no formal declarations, no national anthems, no clear front lines. The conflict unfolded across boardrooms, data fortresses, oceans, and city streets. It was waged through deniable assets, proxy corporations, mercenary armies, and information warfare. Civilians rarely knew who was fighting who. Only that prices were rising, services were failing, and violence was becoming more frequent. At the center of this conflict stood two titans, Arasaka and Militech. Arasaka represented global corporate sovereignty at its most refined, a vertically integrated empire of security, banking, manufacturing, and intelligence, deeply intertwined with Japanese political power. Militech, by contrast, was the embodiment of American corporate militarism, born from the remnants of the old United States defense industry and increasingly aligned with the emerging new United States of America, where Arasaka favored secrecy, infiltration, and long-term influence. Militech favored overwhelming force, visibility, and rapid dominance. The spark that ignited open conflict came from the ocean's in the early 2020s. A bitter struggle erupted between rival oceanic corporations over control of shipping routes, seabed resources, and maritime infrastructure. What began as corporate sabotage quickly escalated into armed engagements at sea. Both Arasaka and Militech were drawn in as security contractors, each backing opposing interests. The conflict became a testing ground for new weapons, tactics, and doctrines. As casualties mounted and assets were destroyed, restraint vanished. Covert operations escalated into direct strikes. Corporate facilities were sabotaged. Executives disappeared. Data centers were wiped clean. The net became a battlefield of intrusion countermeasures, lethal black ice, and autonomous attack programs. Entire sections of the global network collapsed under the strain. For the first time, corporations were no longer merely competing. They were at war. Night City, with its strategic location, corporate presence, and nominal independence, was inevitably drawn into the conflict. Both Arasaka and Militech maintained significant assets within the city. Offices, data vaults, personnel hubs. Each side viewed control of Night City as both a symbolic and logistical prize. As tensions escalated, the city changed. Checkpoints multiplied. Armed patrols became common. Mercenary recruitment surged as both corporations sought deniable manpower. Gangs were bought, coerced, or eliminated. Supply chains faltered as shipments were intercepted or destroyed. Prices skyrocketed. Ordinary residents found themselves caught between forces they had no influence over. Net suffered its greatest catastrophe. As corporate netrunners deployed increasingly aggressive intrusion programs. Long-standing safeguards failed. Autonomous systems spiraled out of control. The data crash rippled across the global network, corrupting archives, erasing identities, and trapping countless users in digital dead ends. Trust in the net collapsed almost overnight. Amid this chaos, rumors spread of a weapon far more dangerous than any conventional armament. Soulkiller. Originally developed as a net-running tool, capable of copying human consciousness. Soulkiller represented a fundamental violation of human autonomy. It could extract, digitize, and imprison a person's mind, leaving the body empty or dead. While its existence was officially denied, evidence mounted that Arasaka had refined and weaponized the technology. Fear spread quickly, the idea that death was no longer final, that consciousness itself could be stolen and repurposed, terrified even hardened corporate operatives. For many, Soulkiller symbolized the ultimate corporate overreach. Not just control over labor or territory, but over identity itself. This fear galvanized resistance. A group of mercenaries, operatives, and corporate defectors assembled with a singular goal: strike Arasaka at its heart and destroy the Soulkiller program. Among them were legendary figures whose names would echo through Night City for decades: Johnny Silverhand, Morgan Blackhand. Others whose stories would be half remembered, distorted by time and propaganda. Their target was Arasaka Tower in Night City. The plan was desperate and audacious. Infiltrate the tower, reach the secured data repositories, erase Soulkiller and the vast pre-crash archives Arasaka controlled. To ensure success, a tactical nuclear device was brought as a last resort, intended to be detonated deep underground, where shielding would contain the blast. The operation did not go as planned. On August 20th, 2023, the device detonated prematurely within the tower itself. The explosion was catastrophic. Arasaka Tower was annihilated in an instant. Tens of thousands were killed outright. Hundreds of thousands more were injured or exposed to lethal radiation. The blast triggered fires, structural collapses, and seismic disturbances across the city. Buildings crumbled. Infrastructure failed. The skyline was rewritten in fire. This event became known as the Night City Holocaust because the detonation occurred above ground. Long-term radiation was partially mitigated, but the immediate destruction was unparalleled. A massive firestorm engulfed large sections of the city. Toxic debris rained down across Northern California. The bay itself was contaminated with radioactive and industrial waste. Within hours, Night City was uninhabitable. Emergency services collapsed. Hospitals were overwhelmed or destroyed. Millions were displaced. Entire districts were erased from existence. Survivors fled into the outskirts, forming refugee camps and shantytowns. Those who remained scavenged what they could from the ruins. The political fallout was immediate. The President of the new United States moved swiftly to seize control of the narrative. Arasaka was blamed for the attack, portrayed as a rogue foreign corporation willing to annihilate an American city to preserve its secrets. Its assets were seized, its licenses revoked, its leadership branded as terrorists. Militech was nationalized under emergency authority. Publicly, this was framed as a necessary measure to protect national security. Privately, it ensured that the United States retained control over the most powerful private military force on the planet. The war burned itself out shortly thereafter. Arasaka driven from North America and global. Infrastructure in ruins. Open hostilities became unsustainable. What remained of the Fourth Corporate War ended not with victory, but with exhaustion. Night City was left in ruins. The world had crossed a threshold. Nuclear weapons had been deployed not by nations, but by corporations and deniable assets. Consciousness itself had become a battleground. The illusion that corporate power could be contained was permanently shattered from the ashes of the Arasaka Tower. A new era emerged, one defined not by law or loyalty, but by survival. Night City would rebuild, but it would never forget what it had become. The first years after the destruction of Arasaka Tower were not defined by rebuilding, but by survival. Night City did not rise from the ashes quickly, nor was it ever truly abandoned. What remained in the aftermath of the nuclear detonation was a wounded metropolis struggling to breathe beneath layers of dust, radiation, and grief. For those who lived through it, the world did not end on August 20th, 2023. It simply became something far harsher. In the immediate aftermath, Night City was barely habitable. Fires raged uncontrollably across the urban core. Toxic smoke choked the sky, tinting dawn and dusk in unnatural shades of red and orange. Critical infrastructure had been obliterated. Power grids lay shattered. Water systems ruptured. Streets were torn open by shockwaves and secondary collapses. The city's iconic skyline was reduced to jagged silhouettes and smoldering ruins. Emergency services ceased to function almost entirely. Hospitals had been destroyed or rendered inaccessible. Medical supplies were exhausted within days. The Night City Police Department fragmented, with many officers killed, missing, or forced to abandon their posts to protect their families. Specialized units like MaxStack went rogue, operating independently in an effort to contain cyberpsychotic outbreaks among survivors who had been pushed past their limits. Millions were displaced. Those who could flee did so immediately, pouring into surrounding suburbs, highways, and badlands. Makeshift refugee camps sprang up overnight, formed from scavenged materials and abandoned vehicles. Others remained behind, either trapped by injury, poverty, or refusal to abandon what little they had left. Entire communities vanished in the chaos, absorbed into the sprawl of displacement. Radiation was an ever-present threat. Although the detonation was not a ground burst, contamination spread through pulverized debris and ash. Certain areas became lethal within hours. Others accumulated exposure slowly, poisoning those who lingered too long. The heart of the blast zone became known simply as the hot zone, a scar at the center of the city where no permanent habitation was possible for years. Survival in this environment required adaptability. Nomad clans were among the first to respond. Long accustomed to operating outside traditional infrastructure, they stepped into roles abandoned by collapsed institutions. They transported food, medicine, and survivors. They established supply routes through the Badlands. Their vehicles became lifelines, their convoys moving between shattered settlements. Like arteries in a dying body, corporate response was slower and calculated. Many megacorporations had already withdrawn from Night City before the blast, relocating assets to safer regions. Those that remained prioritized recovery only where it aligned with long-term profit. Aid was distributed selectively. Reconstruction efforts were tied to future ownership and influence. Entire districts were written off as losses, deemed too contaminated or unstable to justify investment. For years, Night City existed in a liminal state, too important to abandon, too damaged to restore. Debris removal became the first step toward recovery, and it was a task of staggering scale. With traditional waste disposal impossible, vast quantities of rubble were pushed into the bay, reshaping the coastline once again. Radioactive material from the hot zone was mixed with concrete and steel, buried beneath layers of fill. Official reports claimed minimal casualties during cleanup. The truth was never fully accounted for. Temporary housing followed. Shipping containers were stacked into modular living spaces. Prefabricated structures rose where neighborhoods once stood. These were not homes in the traditional sense, but shelters. Privacy was minimal. Security was inconsistent. Still, they provided something essential. A place to exist. Night Corp emerged as a central figure in the reconstruction effort. Founded from the remnants of Richard Knight's legacy, Night Corp positioned itself as both benefactor and steward. It coordinated with city officials, corporate partners, and nomad groups to restore basic functionality. Roads were cleared. Limited power returned. Local networks replaced the shattered global net, allowing fragments of communication to resume. Yet recovery was uneven. Corporate zones were prioritized. Investment flowed into areas deemed valuable. Elsewhere, decay continued. Entire districts were absorbed into expanding combat zones, their populations left to self-govern or perish. The city became a patchwork of renewal and neglect. By the early 2030s, Night City had stabilized enough to attract interest once more. Smaller corporations, freelancers, and opportunists moved in, drawn by low costs and high risk. The absence of strong centralized authority made experimentation possible. New technologies were tested. New markets emerged. Reconstruction became not just a necessity, but an industry. Politically, Night City drifted further from federal influence. The new United States had little interest in reclaiming a city it had already written off. Instead, Night City was allowed to function as a semi-independent entity, a free city in all but name. Trade agreements replaced governance. Autonomy became a bargaining chip. By the mid-2040s, radiation levels had declined enough to permit limited redevelopment near the former blast zone. The ruins remained, preserved as much by cost as by memory. Around them, new districts rose, shaped by lessons learned from catastrophe. Night City did not rebuild to become safer, it rebuilt to become profitable. The trauma of the past was not erased. It was layered over, buried beneath concrete and contracts. Those who survived carried the memory forward, shaping the city's culture and identity. Cynicism deepened. Ambition sharpened. Trust became rarer than ever. Out of ruin came resilience. Out of loss came a city that refused to vanish. Night City endured, and with endurance came opportunity. The stage was set for a new generation to rise. By the middle of the 21st century, it was no longer accurate to describe megacorporations as businesses. They did not merely sell products or services. They governed territory, enforced law, waged war, controlled information, and shaped the conditions under which billions of people lived and died. The collapse of traditional nation-states had not eliminated power. It had simply changed its shape. In this new world, corporations did not answer to voters or constitutions. They answered to shareholders, market forces, and internal hierarchies designed to maximize survival and expansion. Loyalty was contractual. Ethics were optional. Accountability was rare. To understand Night City and the wider cyberpunk world, one must understand the entities that truly rule it. Among them, none loomed larger than Arasaka. Arasaka was more than a corporation. It was a dynasty. Founded in the early 20th century, Arasaka survived the collapse of empires, global wars, and economic devastation by adapting relentlessly. By the late 20th century, it had transformed itself into a vertically integrated powerhouse spanning banking, manufacturing, logistics, and corporate security. Its greatest strength lay in its ability to merge corporate operations with state-level influence, particularly within Japan. Arasaka's security division became its most feared arm. Highly trained, fanatically loyal, and equipped with cutting-edge technology, Arasaka forces functioned as both private military and intelligence agency. Their presence alone was often enough to deter opposition. Assassinations, disappearances, and covert operations were handled with quiet efficiency, leaving little evidence and fewer witnesses. At the heart of Arasaka's power was control of information through its banking systems, data vaults, and secure networks, Arasaka accumulated vast archives of financial, political, and personal intelligence. This information was leverage. It allowed the corporation to manipulate markets, influence governments, and eliminate rivals without ever firing a shot. When force was required, it was applied surgically. The development of Soulkiller represented the logical extreme of this. Philosophy. If information was power, then consciousness itself was the ultimate asset. The ability to digitize, store, and manipulate human minds blurred the boundary between life and data. While Arasaka publicly denied the existence of such technology, its shadow shaped global fear and resistance. Even after Arasaka's fall from North America, following the Fourth Corporate War, the legacy of Soulkiller continued to haunt the world. Opposing Arasaka was MILI Tech. Where Arasaka favored subtlety and long-term infiltration, Militech embraced visibility and force. Born from the remnants of the American military-industrial complex, Militech positioned itself as both weapons manufacturer and private army. Its catalog ranged from small arms and armored vehicles to aerospace platforms and autonomous combat systems. Militech's relationship with the new United States of America was symbiotic. As federal authority weakened, Militech filled the void, supplying equipment, training, and manpower. In return, it gained political protection and lucrative contracts. Over time, the distinction between national military and corporate force blurred. Militech officers advised policymakers. Policymakers shielded Militech from scrutiny. During the Fourth Corporate War, Militech's aggressive doctrine pushed the conflict into open devastation. Its willingness to deploy overwhelming force accelerated escalation and normalized the use of extreme measures. When the war ended, Militech emerged battered but intact, quickly nationalized to preserve American influence while retaining its corporate structure. Beyond these two giants existed a constellation of powerful corporations, each specializing in domains essential to survival. Biotechnica dominated agriculture and biotechnology. In a world ravaged by environmental collapse, food was power. Biotechnica controlled genetically engineered crops designed to thrive in hostile conditions. Its patents ensured dependence. Governments and communities that relied on Biotechnica seeds were locked into perpetual licensing agreements. Attempts to resist were met with legal pressure, economic strangulation, or worse. Biotechnica S research extended beyond crops, cloned organs, synthetic protein, engineered livestock, and experimental human cloning all fell within its purview. Publicly, these technologies promised restoration and abundance. Privately, they raised profound ethical questions. Control over life itself became another corporate asset. Information was governed by another set of entities. Media conglomerates shaped public perception, curated reality, and erased inconvenient truths. News was entertainment. Entertainment was influence. Corporations that controlled media streams wielded power rivaling any army. NetWatch occupied a unique position, tasked with protecting the remnants of the global net. NetWatch functioned as both guardian and gatekeeper. It monitored rogue artificial intelligences, enforced the Black Wall, and hunted netrunners who ventured too far into forbidden digital territory. Though often framed as a neutral regulator, NetWatch's authority rested on corporate backing and selective enforcement. It chose which threats to prioritize and which to ignore. Night Corp stood apart. Unlike other megacorporations, Night Corp did not seek global dominance. Its focus was singular. Night City itself. Formed from Richard Knight's legacy, the corporation positioned itself as steward rather than ruler. It coordinated reconstruction, infrastructure, and long-term planning. Yet even Night Corp operated within the same corporate logic as its peers. Stability served investment. Preservation served influence. Weapons manufacturers, like Kang Dao and Tsunami Arms, fueled the city's perpetual tension. Their products flooded the streets, equipping gangs, mercenaries, and corporate forces alike. Innovation was constant. Smart weapons, guided ammunition, and neural-linked systems raised lethality while lowering the barrier to violence. In Night City, firepower was currency. Medical corporations completed the picture. Trauma. Team International offered elite emergency response to those who could afford it. Their armored aircraft and heavily armed paramedics symbolized the commodification of survival. If you paid, help arrived. If you didn't, you were on your own. Competing services cut corners, raced rivals to patience, and monetized data gleaned from suffering. Together, these corporations formed an ecosystem. They competed fiercely, sabotaged one another, and occasionally went to war. But they also depended on one another. Weapons required fuel. Fuel required agriculture. Agriculture required security. Security required data. Data required control. This interdependence created a fragile equilibrium. Night City existed within that balance. A neutral ground, a proving ground, a pressure valve for global corporate ambition. For the people who lived there, megacorporations were not abstract entities. They were landlords, employers, judges, and executioners. They determined where you could live, what you could eat, and how long you might survive. By the time the world approached 2077, it was clear that megacorporations were not a temporary aberration. They were the system. And Night City was their most honest reflection. By the time the world reached the middle of the 21st century, the influence of megacorporations was no longer something people debated. It was something they lived with. Every aspect of daily life had been reshaped by technology, privatization, and the quiet normalization of inequality. The cyberpunk world was not defined solely by who held power, but by how that power changed what it meant to be human. Technology was everywhere, but it was never evenly distributed. Advanced cyberware, neural implants, and genetic treatments promised strength, speed, intelligence, and longevity. Advertisements framed augmentation as liberation, a way to overcome biological limitations and reclaim agency in a hostile world. In practice, access to high-quality augmentation was tied directly to wealth, employment status, and corporate affiliation. The body became another investment portfolio. For those with corporate contracts, enhancement was often mandatory. Security personnel received reflex boosters and reinforced skeletons. Executives adopted memory implants and neural coprocessors. Technicians relied on direct neural interfaces to remain competitive. Augmentation was no longer about improvement. It was about remaining employable. Outside corporate zones, cyberware took on a different meaning. Black market implants flooded the streets. Clinics operated without licenses, ethics boards, or long-term patient care. Installation was fast, cheap, and dangerous. For many, the risk was worth it. In Night City, being unaugmented meant being vulnerable. It meant slower reaction times, weaker bodies, and fewer options. The line between survival and self-destruction grew thin. As more people replaced flesh with chrome. The psychological consequences became impossible to ignore. Neural overload, sensory distortion, and emotional dampening became increasingly common. Empathy eroded. Impulse control degraded. Violence felt distant, unreal, as if experienced through a screen. This condition became known as cyberpsychosis. Cyberpsychosis was not a single disorder, but a spectrum of breakdowns caused by excessive augmentation combined with chronic stress, trauma, and social isolation. Corporate messaging framed it as a personal failure, a lack of discipline, or mental resilience. The reality was far more complex. Cyberpsychosis was a systemic consequence of a world that demanded constant self-modification without offering stability to contain the threat. Specialized enforcement units were expanded max tac. Teams operated with one directive: neutralize the target at any cost. Their members were often heavily augmented themselves, selected for psychological profiles capable of functioning under extreme conditions. Engagements were swift and brutal. Negotiation was rare. Survival rates for cyberpsychotic individuals were low. For the public, MaxTac served as both deterrent and reassurance. They were proof that the system could still respond to its own failures, even if that response was lethal. While bodies changed, culture fragmented. Traditional social structures eroded as communities were displaced and reorganized around economic utility. Family units became fluid. Loyalty shifted from kinship to contracts. Identity became performative, curated through fashion, implants, and digital presence. Media accelerated this fragmentation. Braindance. Technology allowed users to experience recorded sensations directly, bypassing imagination entirely. Pleasure, fear, violence, intimacy, all could be consumed on demand. For many, braindance became an escape from lives defined by scarcity and risk. For others, it blurred the line between experience and reality, dulling emotional response to real-world suffering. News followed a similar trajectory. Information was curated to entertain rather than inform. Corporate-owned networks tailored narratives to reinforce existing beliefs and maintain audience engagement. Truth became less important than impact. Scandals flashed briefly before being replaced. Accountability dissolved into noise. Religion did not disappear, but it transformed. Traditional faiths struggled to compete with technological transcendence. Some adapted, incorporating augmentation into their doctrines. Others rejected cyberware entirely, forming insular communities. New belief systems emerged around artificial intelligence, digital immortality, and the preservation of consciousness. In a world where minds could be copied, death itself felt negotiable. Economically, society stratified into rigid layers. At the top were corporate elites, insulated from most consequences. Beneath them were contracted workers, protected so long as they remained useful. Below that existed a vast population of freelancers, gig laborers, and mercenaries. At the bottom were the dispossessed, surviving through scavenging, informal economies, or crime. Mobility between these layers was possible, but rare. Success required risk-taking that often ended in death. Failure was unforgiving. Violence became ambient. Gunfire, explosions, and sirens blended into the background of city life. Trauma desensitized populations. Children grew up accustomed to armored vehicles and security drones. Safety was no longer expected. It was rented. Yet, within this harsh reality, humanity persisted. People formed bonds in unlikely places. Communities emerged in neglected neighborhoods. Art, music, and fashion flourished as acts of defiance. In Night City, style was not vanity. It was survival. Standing out could be dangerous, but it could also command respect. Identity became fluid. Names, bodies, and allegiances changed. Reinvention was constant. For some, this offered freedom. For others, it meant never feeling whole. The cyberpunk world did not erase humanity. It tested it. And for those who endured, it forged a resilience as sharp and unforgiving as chrome. This was the human cost of progress. And it was paid every day. By the late 2060s, the illusion that the world had stabilized was wearing thin. Mega corporations had entrenched themselves. Cities like Night City functioned as autonomous engines of profit and violence. Yet beneath this apparent equilibrium, old ambitions were resurfacing. The fractured remnants of the United States. now reconstituted as the new United States of America, had never fully abandoned the idea of reunification. For decades, the NUSA had watched the free states operate with increasing independence. Some prospered through trade and corporate partnerships. Others stagnated or collapsed under internal strain. From Washington's perspective, this fragmentation represented weakness. A divided continent was vulnerable to foreign corporate influence and external powers. Reunification was framed not as conquest, but as necessity. This ambition culminated in what history would call the unification war. The conflict did not begin with a single invasion, but with escalating pressure. Federal mandates were issued. Trade restrictions tightened. Military forces were repositioned near contested borders. Diplomatic overtures were paired with covert destabilization efforts. The message was clear: rejoin the Union or be brought back by force. The free states resisted. Many had spent decades building identities separate from the NUSA. Their economies, laws, and cultures no longer aligned with federal authority. For them, reunification meant surrendering autonomy to a government that had once abandoned them. Tensions rose as skirmishes broke out along state lines. What had begun as political posturing hardened into armed conflict. Night City found itself in a precarious position. Technically aligned with the Free State of Northern California, the city had little interest in choosing sides. Its economy depended on neutrality. Its survival depended on avoiding direct occupation. While Northern California prepared for war, Night City's council hesitated, divided between fear of federal incursion and fear of corporate retaliation. As NUSA forces advanced toward the West Coast, the threat became impossible to ignore. Armored units gathered in the Badlands. Airspace restrictions tightened. Intelligence drones probed city defenses. The possibility of Night City becoming a battlefield loomed closer with each passing week. For a city still scarred by nuclear devastation, another war was unthinkable. Behind closed doors, negotiations failed. The NUSA demanded compliance. The Free States refused. Night City's council delayed, hoping neutrality would buy time. It did not. Faced with the imminent approach of federal forces, a decision was made that would reshape the city's future. Arasaka was invited back. The corporation that had once been blamed for Night City's destruction returned not as conqueror, but as protector. Leveraging decades-old relationships and mutual interests, Arasaka deployed a massive carrier group into Night City's waters. The message was unmistakable. Any attempt to seize the city would result in catastrophic escalation. The NUSA paused. Federal leadership understood the implications. A direct clash with Arasaka risked reigniting global corporate war. Civilian casualties would be immense. Economic fallout would be severe. Within days, NUSA forces withdrew from the city's immediate perimeter. Shortly thereafter, the Arvin Accord was signed. The agreement formally ended the unification war and recognized Night City as an autonomous international free city. It would not fall under NUSA authority, nor would it answer to any free state. In exchange, Night City became a neutral economic zone, open to corporate investment and international trade. The war ended without a decisive victor, but Night City paid the price. Autonomy came at the cost of corporate dominance. With Arasaka's return, other megacorporations followed. Investments poured in. Skyscrapers rose. Security tightened. The city entered another era of growth. But the balance of power shifted decisively away from public governance. Political control became increasingly symbolic. Mayors were elected, but their authority was limited. The city council functioned as an intermediary between corporate interests and public unrest. Laws were written to accommodate investment. Enforcement followed profit. Districts like Pacifica illustrated this new reality. Originally envisioned as a luxury resort and tourist destination. Pacifica collapsed when investors withdrew. Abandoned construction projects became shelters, then battlegrounds. Gangs and displaced populations took control. Corporate interest vanished. The area was effectively written off, allowed to rot so long as it remained contained. Elsewhere, redevelopment flourished. Corporate Plaza gleamed. Watson and Westbrook prospered. Surveillance networks expanded. Security became omnipresent. The divide between wealth and abandonment grew sharper than ever. By the mid-2070s, Night City had fully assumed its role. It was no longer merely a survivor of catastrophe. It was a hub, a crossroads for corporations, mercenaries, fixers, and dreamers. A place where fortunes could be made and erased. Overnight, the Unification War had reaffirmed a simple truth. Night City could not be conquered. It could only be negotiated with. As the year 2077 approached, the city stood poised on another threshold. Its streets were alive with ambition. Its shadows were thick with secrets. Beneath the glow of neon and the hum of machinery, forces old and new were aligning. The past had shaped Night City. Now, it waited for the next legend to step into its streets. By the year 2077, Night City no longer needed to explain itself. It did not pretend to be just, nor did it hide what it was. The city existed as a living machine, fueled by ambition, desperation, and profit, its streets humming with the accumulated weight of everything that had come before. For those who arrived here chasing opportunity, Night City offered one simple promise: survive long enough, and you might matter. Night City in 2077 was not unified. It was layered. At its heart stood Corporate Plaza, the polished core where megacorporations displayed their power openly. Towers of glass and steel pierced the sky, each one a fortress as much as an office. Security was absolute. Surveillance omnipresent. Access was regulated by contracts, credentials, and unspoken rules. Inside these towers, decisions were made that reshaped markets, erased competitors, and redirected lives with a single signature. For those who worked here, safety was guaranteed, so long as usefulness endured. Surrounding the corporate core lay districts that reflected every possible outcome of Night City's long history. Watson, once one of the city's earliest developed areas, had become a dense urban maze. Markets spilled into narrow streets. Neon signage layered over aging concrete. It was a district of opportunity and exploitation, where small businesses survived alongside criminal enterprises, and where corporate neglect created space for gangs, fixers, and independent operators to thrive. Westbrook projected luxury and aspiration. High-end clubs, boutiques, and private residences catered to the wealthy and influential. Here, style was currency. Reputation mattered as much as money. Violence existed, but it was discreet, buried beneath exclusivity and private security. Westbrook demonstrated how Night City rewarded those who learned how to play its games. Haywood told a different story. Once a working-class district, Haywood carried the scars of displacement and neglect. Its communities relied on shared identity and mutual protection in the absence of meaningful civic support. Gangs here were not always predators. Some functioned as informal governance, enforcing local order where official systems failed. Loyalty was personal, and betrayal carried consequences. Pacifica stood as Night City's most visible failure, abandoned by investors. Cut off from municipal services and left to decay, Pacifica became a containment zone in all but name. Massive unfinished structures loomed over makeshift settlements. Here, survival was collective. Outsiders were unwelcome. Corporate authority barely penetrated its borders, making it both a refuge and a trap. Beyond the city proper stretched the Badlands. Once peripheral, the Badlands had become essential. Nomad clans controlled supply routes, transportation, and smuggling networks that kept Night City alive. Their convoys moved goods that corporations could not or would not handle directly. Though often dismissed as outsiders, nomads understood the city's dependencies better than most. Night City's underworld was as structured as its corporate sphere. Fixers operated as brokers of opportunity and danger, assigning work, managing reputations, and enforcing informal codes. Mercenaries, known as edgerunners, navigated short-term contracts that promised wealth or death in equal measure. Gangs controlled territory, identity, and influence, shaping the street-level reality district by district. Law enforcement existed, but selectively. The Night City Police Department maintained order where profit demanded it. Elsewhere, response times were slow or non-existent. MaxTac loomed as the final solution, deployed only when threats exceeded acceptable thresholds. Justice was not blind. It was calculated. Technology saturated every corner of daily life. Cyberware was expected. Neural interfaces were commonplace. Data flowed constantly between bodies, devices, and networks. Privacy was an outdated concept. Survival required adaptation, constant self-modification, and awareness of unseen systems watching every move. Violence was routine. Gunfire echoed through alleyways. Sirens faded into background noise. Trauma-team aircraft cut through the skyline, extracting those who could afford survival. Death was common. Memory was short. Legends were born not from longevity, but from impact. And yet Night City endured. People still laughed in bars. Music still pulsed through clubs. Art still emerged from ruins. Humanity persisted in fragments, defiant and stubborn. In a world that measured worth by utility, some chose to matter on their own terms. This was the city that awaited those who arrived in 2077, a city shaped by collapse, corporate ambition, and survival. A city that did not care who you were when you arrived, only what you would become. In Night City, everyone wants to be remembered, because here, legends aren't born, they're taken. If you enjoyed this journey through the complete lore of the Cyberpunk 2077 world, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and joining the Midnight Lorekeeper for more stories to sleep to, drawn from the darkest corners of games, films, and fiction. Until next time, stay sharp and good night. Night City does not end here. Every street, every district, every contract, and quiet betrayal described so far exists as the stage rather than the story itself. The forces that shaped this city have finished their work, but what they created is not static. It waits, because in 2077, Night City is not defined only by corporations, gangs, or history. It is defined by those who move through it, those who take the risks no one else will, those who survive long enough to leave a mark. World is set, the city is ready, and somewhere within its neon-lit streets, a mercenary is about to step into a story that could change everything. That story comes next. In Night City, legends are not born from destiny. They are forged by circumstance, choice, and survival. By the time the year 2077 arrives, the city has already decided how it treats people like V. It uses them until they break, disappear, or become something worth remembering. V is not a hero in the traditional sense. V is a mercenary, a professional survivor navigating a city that trades lives for profit. What makes V different is not strength, skill, or ambition. It is timing. V enters Night City at a moment when multiple systems are under strain, when corporate rivalries are unstable, and when old ghosts are ready to surface. V's story begins long before the relic ever enters the picture, depending on the path taken. V arrives in Night City as a nomad crossing the borderlands, a street kid returning home after failure elsewhere, or a corporate operative cast aside by the system they once served. Each origin shapes how V understands the city, but none grant immunity from its rules. Regardless of background, V begins as a small player in a vast machine. The early days are defined by work, small contracts, dangerous jobs, introductions through fixers who test reliability before trust. This is where V learns Night City's rhythms. Who pays on time? Who lies? Who kills without warning? Survival depends on reputation, discretion, and adaptability. Everything changes with the heist. The job at Konpeki Plaza is meant to be a turning point, a chance to move beyond street-level work and into something bigger. The target is the Relic, an experimental biochip developed by Arasaka, rumored to contain groundbreaking technology tied to digital consciousness. The job goes wrong. Arasaka security responds with overwhelming force. Allies are lost. Escape becomes improvisation. In the chaos, V slots the Relic into their own neural interface to protect it from damage. This decision saves the chip dotted. Condemns V, the Relic is not inert. It carries an engram of Johnny Silverhand, the long-dead rocker boy whose actions helped ignite the Fourth Corporate War. As the biochip malfunctions, Johnny's consciousness begins overriding V's own neural patterns. The process is irreversible. Without intervention, V will be erased. Johnny Silverhand is not a passive passenger. He is volatile, confrontational, and deeply shaped by his hatred of Arasaka. His presence forces V into constant negotiation, not only with the city, but with their own identity. Over time, the line between V and Johnny begins to blur. Memories overlap. Emotions bleed through. Control becomes contested. V's journey from this point branches. Seeking a cure draws V into the deepest layers of Night City's power structure. Corporate executives, Netwatch agents, rogue A's beyond the black wall, fixers who deal in secrets rather than weapons. Each path reveals another truth about the city and another limit of personal agency. Along the way, V becomes entangled with multiple factions. Some see V as a tool, others as a threat, a few as something rarer, a variable. Through these connections, V witnesses the full spectrum of Night City life: corporate luxury and street-level desperation, loyalty and betrayal, hope and inevitability. The question that defines V's story is never simply survival, it is choice. How much of themselves is V willing to sacrifice to keep living? How much control are they willing to surrender? Whether to resist Johnny's influence or embrace it. Whether to trust corporations, allies, or no one at all. The endings of V's story are many. Some paths offer escape at terrible cost. Others offer legacy without survival. Some preserve the body. Others preserve the mind. None are clean. None are free of consequence. What remains consistent is this: V matters, not because they save the world, not because they dismantle corporate power, but because in a city designed to erase individuals, V leaves an impact that cannot be ignored. In Night City, becoming a legend does not mean winning. It means being remembered. That is the cruelest truth the city has to offer. This is where the world of Cyberpunk 2077 becomes personal. Where history gives way to story. Where the city meets the mercenary. If you've made it this far, thank you for spending this time in Night City. If this deep dive into the complete lore of Cyberpunk 2077 helped you relax, unwind, or drift off to sleep, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and joining the Midnight Lorekeeper for more long-form lore journeys. Until next time, good night, Shum.